Hey guys, it's time for some more Community Starcraft 2. I'm your host Magnet, and as you can see on the screen, today's TvT lesson is going to be regarding unit compositions and micro. Kind of reversed the way I'm supposed to say that, but we'll be taking a look at a lot of different compositions here, and it's going to get a little weird because TvT is a very fluid matchup in the sense that the compositions can change kind of at the drop of the hat. But we'll start off with Marine Tank, we'll move into Bio and start covering some more mech and sky transitions as the game goes on. In general, a couple of things really do need to be said, and they're going to be recurring throughout this. The things that are going to be recurring are the fact that tanks are extremely good in the air, or rather extremely good on the ground. They're not good in the air, that doesn't make any sense. But that also air control matters a lot. So I'm going to show you guys a couple of things that you would normally expect in this matchup, and of course what I'm doing is just making sure everyone has equal upgrades at a similar time in the game. So, like we're talking about, we're going to be covering Marine Tank, and I'm just going to be covering the super basics of Marine Tank, considering it's really up to you to not mess up these engagements. They can be kind of slow, they can be a little weird, but the idea is that both players will have quite a few tanks, they'll both be sieged up, and they'll both have a lot of Marines and medevacs. And this is a composition that some people can stay on for a little while, but we'll start talking about ways that you can engage this. Now, if one player were to just run in, they would die. So the idea here is that you want to get good position with your tanks, like I'm moving up here, but you want to do this at a point where he can't just charge in, because if they just charge in when you're unsieged, then you're probably going to lose. So that's what the weird thing is about this. But if you can do things like baiting their Marines into your tanks, then that's what you're going to want to do. Whoever engages into the siege tank first is going to lose. So I'll just demonstrate that. You can see the Marines just basically disappear. So if you get a fight like this, let's say you still have some Marines left over and he still just has his tanks. If he just unsieges his tanks, you can chase those down with your Marines and you can kill him. But another thing you can do is if he just decides to stay there and continue to rally Marines, you of course just can't walk in there. What you're going to want to do is just start dropping some Marines on top of his tanks and try to whittle this tank count down just a little bit. And then there should be a point where he only has a few siege tanks, and that's actually still stronger than you would think. But you can still kind of try and drop in there. You can unsiege your tanks and move forward eventually to break stuff like this, but you'll notice that he still has a lot of tanks. And you'll notice that I'm still going to take significant losses even doing this. So I'm just going to boost and drop these Marines right on top of the tanks while I unsiege my own and just walk up there. So that's in general how you're going to break most of these engagements, is you're going to get them to do something dumb and just kind of walk into siege tank range, or you're going to force them to engage into you because you have such good position. And tank versus tank battles are so complicated that I'm probably just going to have to do a totally different video for it. So now we're going to talk about if each player supplements their tank and Marine with Vikings. And we're going to demonstrate how important winning the air battle is here. And throughout most of these fights, we're going to be focusing on the player on the left, since that's what we've been doing for most of these so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to siege my tanks up in a spot where he can't really deal with it. So I'm going to siege just outside of his siege range, which you can see just for a second there. I clicked on his tank to see where it extended to. I'm not quite in their siege tank range yet because I need to win the air fight first. So I'm going to start fighting with the Vikings. If Marines try to participate, I just lure them back in my own tanks. So once I can kill him in the air with the Viking count, all of a sudden now I can start to advance on him and there's not much he can do about it. So if I just sit with my Viking over like this, I can see his siege tank range. You can see it extends out that far. I'm going to walk my tank just barely into his range. I'm going to siege, but he can't shoot me because he can't see me right now. He's going to have to use scans in order to see me. So my tanks can hit his, but he can't hit mine because I'm out of vision range right now. So that's why winning the air battle is important. The Vikings will give you that extra vision that you need in order to start picking this apart, so I can start killing his medevacs. And again, if he ever tries to run in there with his Marines, he's just going to lose. So that's why having the air control is so important. You can see the tank is just getting a ton of free kills because he just can't see without having unit over there or without scanning. So that's going to be another part of how to break those tank versus tank fights in Marine Tank especially. It's pretty weird, and it does take a lot of practice, and it's kind of hard to demonstrate everything perfectly because it takes two players' decision making to make that a real scenario. So at least you'll know the idea of what you want to do. Now I'm going to talk about bio here, and more specifically I'm going to talk about when you're running bio and you're trying to engage someone else's bio. Most of the time this won't happen because tanks are just so good. So I'm going to show you how it will break down if one person's just running pure bio, which is just Marine Marauder, versus somebody that's also running Marine Marauder but that splashes in tanks to their composition just a little bit. So again, I can't overstate how important it is to have tanks on the field because they just demand so much position and they deal so much damage to other Terran units. So what I'm going to show here is if you have your tank sieged up and a bunch of bios, so I'm just trying to spread this out a little bit, I'm kind of derping out, but if they just try to engage into you, even if they have a lot more marauders, there's just no way they're ever going to break this cost efficiently. And that's going to be kind of a theme of this Marine Marauder composition. So if they try to engage in, the tanks are just going to rain down damage. You can even just keep your filler there or pull it back just a little bit if you're starting to have a little bit of a harder time. But even still, you can see the player with the tanks absolutely bowls over the tank or the player without it. So now it becomes, what if your opponent is playing mech and they just have tons upon tons of tanks, because that's a very viable composition. Now this composition, when it is sieged up, is basically unbreakable. So I'm going to show you guys, if you just get perfect compositions or perfect engagements, there's really no way to break this. So I'm going to start dropping Marines on top of these tanks, and you'd think that, oh man, this is going to totally waste him, and then, wait, what? No, actually, the Hellbats and the tanks still completely win. So you can't do that, that's for sure. So the next thing you're going to try is, I've already whittled down his tank count a lot. There's only a handful of tanks here and a handful of Hellbats. And it looks like I have a lot of units, but even still, the Hellbats buffer so well for the tanks that you can't just run in there, even though he doesn't have that many tanks left over. Maybe you killed some off with drops or whatever. So now it's like, okay, maybe I'll start trying to pick away at the tanks with little Marine drops and whatnot. So let's try that, and let's see if we can reduce his tank count far enough to make this a favorable fight for the bio player. And again, the recurring theme is just going to be that you can't afford to do that. You basically, with bio, just have to go around his composition and find other ways to beat it. So you can see he's down to, what, like 4 tanks? And okay, well, let's see if we can engage this. So I'm going to start to spread all these units out, try to get as much arc as possible on those tanks so they don't deal as much damage. So we'll spread this out. And part of this is going to be to kind of demonstrate mech engagements. Now, mech isn't that complicated. You just need a lot of tanks, and you need to get good position with those. And the thing you're going to struggle against is the bio player dropping all over your base and stuff. So this kind of serves 2 purposes. But not many tanks. Let's just stim in there with a huge army and see what happens. A lot of Hellbats are buffering a lot of the damage, but even still, only with those few tanks in the background, the bio player just gets completely wiped. So let's talk about now what you need to do with this composition. What you need to do is you need to be constantly dropping around the map and making him move. Now if he's on the move, so his composition is moving around and saying, oh, I need to recover, and you catch him on siege like this, you can get really good trades. Of course, during the middle of this, he may siege up, and you may just have to pick up in your medevacs and go somewhere else or drop on top of him. But the idea here is that if he's ever unsieged, you can finally win these fights. And that's pretty much the only condition in which you can reliably win these fights, is when he's unsieged. So just kind of wanted to demonstrate that. Another thing you can do is you can, again, win the air fight. If you win the air battle, all of a sudden the tanks don't matter. So let's just say I have a couple extra Vikings and a few Banshees mixed into my composition to deal with this. I still have Marine Marauder on the ground. So if I come in here and if I win the air fight because I just have more Vikings, or maybe his Vikings aren't participating for some reason, now all of a sudden, what does he have to deal with the Banshees? There's not really all that much. So this is another way you can break mech if you're running Marine Marauders. Start to switch into more of a sky composition. Which brings us to our next point. The game is going to really change as the game goes on. So eventually both players are going to want to start to get into a sky composition with things like battlecruisers and ravens, because that's what's going to eventually dominate everything on the ground. So let's start talking about that. Specifically air battles. So what you see here is that the right player has a few tanks that aren't necessarily useful anymore. The player on the left, which is the one we're usually focusing on, has Ravens and Thors. And despite the red player having a supreme Viking count, if you just drop down these point defense drones, all of a sudden you're neutralizing the usefulness of all these Vikings for a little while. And the Thors in the background, if they're hitting Vikings and splashing on them, then you're just going to plow through that. And then all of a sudden it doesn't really matter what he has on the ground, because once again you just have those Banshees in the air that can kill those tanks. Now let's say you're running the same composition as the last fight, but your opponent starts to get into battlecruisers. If you realize it quickly enough, you can start to supplement with mines. If you don't have mines and they just have a lot of battlecruisers and Ravens and Vikings and stuff, you're probably going to lose that most of the time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have the Vikings come up, try to make the Thors splash on the Vikings, drop your point defense drones, and then you can burrow the mines just right underneath all of his battlecruisers and Vikings, and all of a sudden it disappears and you're in good shape. So This is actually what you will see a lot of the times at the pro level in really good TvT games. They will start getting into BCs, mines, and stuff like that, but we didn't cover mech too much because we kind of covered it a little bit against that biocomposition as the opposing player, but basically with mech you do need to just hold position with your siege tanks and just get places on the map that he can't deal with, and eventually you're going to get to a point where you can push across the map and just kill him with a large enough mech army, assuming you can control correctly and assuming you can mitigate damage from drops. But it's a really complicated matchup. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of the types of battles that are out there and the typical compositions that will go up against one another. But yeah, in the meantime, I guess I'll be making more videos for you guys and coming out with those hopefully in the very near future. So stay tuned for that, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please post down in the comments if you have any questions on anything that was covered here. And of course, lastly, check out our sponsor, which is SC2ReplayStats.com. Really cool replay analysis tools for your own replays. But yeah, I'll check you guys later, and take care.